Welcome to Up Front, the show where we get answers to questions that matter to South Vancouver Islanders. Today we welcome to the program Mayor Lisa Helps of Victoria. Welcome, Mayor Helps.
Thank you.
We're looking forward to having you here today. Elected in 2014, you inherited one of the most expensive and controversial projects in the city's history with the Johnson Street Bridge. Since then, some days it seems like it's one thing after another. The tent city issue, rental housing, vacancy rate, crises, and most recently pushback over the bike lanes. So I wanted to ask you, are you happy that you took the job?
Best job ever, and it's the best time in history to be Mayor of Victoria.
That's
you
fabulous.
listed all the challenges. What I see every day are all the opportunities.
That's great.
So, you know, downtown vacancies reduced from 11% to 5%, building boom, economy's strong. That's the reason we're actually in the housing crisis, because there are people coming here looking for work because they can't find it in Alberta. So, yeah, there are challenges, but yeah, I'm really glad I took the job, and hopefully most Victorians are as well.
Yeah, it sounds like basically I was going to ask you, does it some days feel like a little bit more than you're up for? But it sounds like absolutely not.
Absolutely
is the answer.
not. That's right.
That's fantastic. So let's go back to the Johnson Street Bridge for a minute, because I'm sure people want to hear about that. Do you feel the projected opening date, March 2018, is still realistic? Or what are your thoughts on that?
To date, but as I said, when it got changed from December 2017 to March 2018, why should we believe this new date from the contractor? Right. So I have no information right now to suggest it won't be open by then, but I had no information to suggest it wouldn't be open by December 2017. Right. The key date is on July 17th. That bridge has to be on the boat from China, and that's the date we're watching for right now.
Right, and so far nothing to suggest that that's not going to occur.
That's right.
Okay. So we wanted to also ask some questions that come in from our viewers, so that's a big component of the show. So one of the first questions was from Marjorie, and she says, it's now summer and I see more campers waking up in Topaz Park. Sometimes small groups, and so she wants to know, is there going to be added enforcement to ensure that this doesn't become an encampment and they don't become entrenched similar to the tent city?
Yeah, we're taking a comprehensive approach to Topaz Park. The tent city was on land owned by the province, and it was the province at that time that didn't take any action, and that's why that tent city was set up. Right. What we have in Topaz Park every morning is a partnership between Vic PD, Bylaw, BC Housing, and Pacifica Housing. So not only are we making sure that so-called entrenchment doesn't happen, we're trying to figure out who are those people, what services do they need, and how can we get them into housing. So every morning the bylaw officers and the police and Pacifica and, well, BC Housing is funding it, are there waking people up and trying to figure out what they need.
Right. So similar to that, there's in Recent Park, there's campers near Wharf Street. It's being dubbed Chattel City. So I wanted to sort of ask you, the 7 a.m. bylaw is obviously being enforced in all of these areas where we're seeing this happening. Yeah,
and actually what we're doing in Topaz Park came from what we started doing in Recent Park. So Recent Park, again, BC Housing, City Police, City Bylaw, and Pacifica Housing, trying to find out who these people are and what they need. The reality is, there's not enough housing and the shelters are full, and people have a right to shelter. One of the things I think we do need to look at, particularly for Recent Park, is where can people put their stuff during the day? Right, you and I have our stuff in our homes.
Yes.
So that's something that's I think a next step is to figure out where can people put their stuff, securely store it during the day, and then get it out at night when they need it.
Yeah, that has been a complaint that's come out of the discussions in Chattel City.
Yeah, absolutely, and that makes sense, right? And for the people whose stuff it is, they don't want passersby. Like, I would not want passersby leering into my bedroom. Yeah. Right, it's the same thing. We just need to think of it like that.
That's their place of residence.
Yeah, and they probably want their stuff securely stored so they don't have to sit with it all day. It's really hard to go get food or, goodness knows, go look for a job if you're guarding your shopping cart. Right. So I think it's a win-win if we can figure out where this stuff can go during the day.
Yeah, I think everyone would agree with that. On the issue of homelessness, Diana says she's nervous about drug use in her downtown neighborhood, and it seems to her that a lot of homeless people can also be drug addicts and criminals. She wants to know why in your most recent blog post would you ask that residents take people into their homes? So I think this is a chance to clarify. You can clarify here what you meant by that blog post, and also clarify statistics on our homeless population.
Yeah, sure. So in my blog post, I did not say that we should take homeless people into our homes. I categorically didn't say that. It got turned into that very quickly. What I said is that during the Second World War, people took workers who were homeless
Right.
into their homes. And there's a great quote from the Times columnist mayor, the mayor of Victoria from the 1940s, and he said the exact same thing I did. And I can tell you there was no Facebook outcry in the 1940s.
Right. Yeah,
no,
different environment.
Yeah, different environment. So what I was suggesting, and actually we can, if we've got time later in the segment, we can talk about how that project is progressing, because there are people come forward that said, you know what, I've got a bedroom. Yeah, totally interested in having someone move in. So I didn't say that we should take homeless people in, but I think the response to it really revealed how much stigma there still is against people who live without homes.
Yeah.
Some people who are on the street have mental health and addictions challenges, and those people need health supports. Other people just are too poor to afford the expensive housing that's in Victoria right now, and the low vacancy rates. So they're just unable to afford housing. They're just like you and I.
Right.
People with mental health and addictions challenges, they're just like you and I. So I think what that whole fiasco revealed is the deep-seated stigma and stereotypes that people still have about people who are poor.
Yeah, absolutely. Would you say, though, as mayor, if you were to do it again, would you take a different avenue rather than post it on a blog post? Would you consider, as opposed to doing it that way, looking at the study first and then rolling out the proposal?
Absolutely not.
Okay.
No, the whole point of my blog post, the only thing I wanted in that blog post was 3 people who had housing and 3 people who needed housing, to get them together to come and join me in a focus group. That was the sole point of that blog post.
Right. So
What people did with it. Yeah,
audience.
and I reached that audience and then some. And I would do the exact same thing again. It's not a city-led project. It's the mayor as convener bringing people together and trying to solve problems.
Right.
And if that's not my job, then I don't know what is.
Right. So to those people, you would say, if you don't want to bring people into your homes, you don't have to.
Well, and I'd also say, actually go read my blog post.
Right.
Read my actual blog post, not just reports on my blog post. And you can see very clearly when you read it, it doesn't say anything about taking homeless people into your homes.
Yeah. No, it doesn't. But I think as a mayor, you kind of break the mold a little bit sometimes with those things, and people aren't used to seeing that.
Yeah, that's fine. And that's what Victoria needs.
All right, well, we'll have to take a short break, and we'll be right back.
Sounds good.
Welcome back, Mayor Helps.
Thank you.
So we'll dive right into a question on bike paths from one of our viewers. Bob says, congratulations on bold steps taken with the bike paths on Pandora and the successful opening there. However, the upcoming bike paths on Fort Street do concern him, and he wants to know, Pandora is one thing, but Fort Street's a little bit different. He has friends who operate businesses there who feel they need more consultation with the city, so he's wanting to know if that's going to happen.
We will be consulting with the business community as the lanes are constructed. Originally, so let me just take us all back a few steps. In 2015, after the council decided it was going to build an all ages and abilities cycling network, we wanted to make sure we had the best expertise to help us. And so we went to the city of Copenhagen, we went to Portland. We didn't physically go there, but we looked to them.
Right.
And we compiled and brought here to Victoria an international team of experts to help us design a network that took into consideration, all of the concerns and all of the issues. So how do people move? Where do people shop? What creates quality of life? All of those things you'd hope that a council would look at. And it was with the guidance of that international team that we developed the network, including Fort Street.
Right.
And then we started on Pandora, and we went to Fort afterwards, and we hadn't thought, we better go back and reconfirm and say, okay, now this is happening on Fort Street. We were we reached the people who we were already reaching. We didn't do enough work to reach out to the businesses.
Right.
And so we spent, and then we heard that loud and clear, and so what we did is we spent an extra 6 months working literally foot by foot, all the way from the 500 block all the way up to Cook Street with the businesses to hear their concerns, to figure out, okay, do you need a parking spot here? Great, we'll leave that parking there. Okay, another loading zone there. How long do you need the loading zone to be? And so literally block by block, we went through with the businesses to make the corridor as good as it could be for businesses.
Right.
What we're not doing is reconsidering building it.
Right.
We are building it, and I understand, particularly for small businesses, I understand the fear. This is their livelihood. These are their employees' livelihoods.
Yeah.
what the data shows, city after city after city, and again, we're taking a data-driven approach.
As you should. Yeah.
As we should, is that when this kind of infrastructure goes in, business either stays the same or increases.
Would that be true for large, like stores selling larger items?
Absolutely.
Because of course, like bikes, you wouldn't be able to necessarily.
Of course not,
take
but
those home.
so they deliver, right? You can buy a bicycle, you can buy a fridge by
So it
bike, you
holds
can buy a
true
stove.
for
Absolutely,
across the board
yeah,
for the
yeah,
goods.
absolutely.
Okay.
And I mean, some businesses are better suited to being along bike corridors than others, and that the market will sort that out. But especially when you install two-way infrastructure on a one-way street, you're literally doubling the number of customers that go by the front door of those businesses.
Right. So let's talk about the two-way infrastructure versus the one-way. So if you wanted, you mentioned that you consulted with one of the managers of cycling for the city of Copenhagen, I believe.
Yeah.
It was my understanding that Copenhagen tends to prefer the one-way cycling corridors. So I was just curious, like, what if you wanted to take us through the decision making as to why the two-way on the one-way street, because we've heard a lot of feedback from viewers saying that doesn't make sense to them.
Yeah, in Copenhagen, bike ridership is so high that they need entire streets dedicated just to bicycles, and so we could have done that, but A, we don't have the ridership, and B, it's more expensive. So what we looked at originally is a one-way separated bike lane on Pandora and another separated bike lane going the other way on Johnson Street. To do that would have been almost double the cost of just the two-way on the one-way street, because the signalization of intersections. Okay. So at every intersection you need to have signals for bicycle and signals for cars, because most of the conflicts that happen at intersections. Right. So that's one reason for the increased cost. We'd be doubling the number of intersections that need to be signalized, but also we would need to jackhammer up the sidewalks and widen the streets in the 500 and 600 blocks of Johnson Street, because there's not enough road width. So these are all things that we did take into consideration.
Cost was a major consideration.
Cost was a major consideration, and there are two-way bike lanes on one-way streets in Montreal, Ottawa, San Francisco.
Yeah, it is a best practice. It really seems to come down to preference in terms of the city and ridership and everything.
Yeah, it's a best practice, and again, if we were so lucky to be Copenhagen, and maybe we'll be there in 40 years, they got rid of their two-way and turned it into a one-way because of volume. They simply had too many bicycles to accommodate in a two-way lane.
Oh, that's very interesting. So along the unusual transportation methods, we have a question coming from Alice that says, talking about skateboarding. So she says she was almost run over on Douglas Street by a high-speed skateboarder, and she, her understanding was they're supposed to ride on the street. What's being done about this, and are the bylaws being enforced?
Yeah, they are. They are supposed to ride on the street, and the bylaws are being enforced. You can imagine that we've already had a question about camping in parks. We need to deploy our limited bylaw officers to the most serious issues. Right. In terms of skateboarders, now that we have the bike infrastructure on Pandora, there's an alternative there. Right. If you're a skateboarder, you're taking your life into your hands to skateboard down the bike lane on Douglas Street with buses pulling in and out, but that is where they're supposed to be. I think we need to do more education and more enforcement, but what we don't want to discourage is people using alternate modes of transportation, because when that person has come to downtown by skateboard, they haven't come downtown by car, and that means that there is a parking space somewhere that they're not taking up.
Right. So I think let's talk a little bit about affordable housing. So what we're wondering is basically, is the city cracking down on short-term or vacation rentals, and if so, how?
So yes, the city is, and I haven't been involved in those discussions, but the city is taking a similar approach to Vancouver. First of all, if you are living in a single-family dwelling and you have a secondary suite or a garden suite, those must only be used for housing, for long-term rentals, not for short-term, and that's being written into policy and being enforced. The more concerning ones for council, I think, are the downtown condo buildings. Right. And so that's council, again, is taking a comprehensive approach. It takes a little while to put the policy in place, but I would say that all of council that's participating in this discussion is very serious, has given staff direction to come back, and we'll see those changes soon. Okay.
And you received a little bit of heat recently about the Airbnb controversy around whether you're a renter or not a renter, so I thought I'd give you a chance to set the record straight here.
Yes, I rent.
You do rent?
Yeah, I rent, and I don't run an Airbnb, and I don't benefit from an Airbnb. And again, that was really, I think, people looking to make trouble. And interestingly, it came in response to the blog post that we talked about earlier.
Right, it did,
so I don't know how people would purport to know what my relationship status is, whether I have a common law partner or not, which I don't, whether I benefit from an Airbnb. And actually, I had to dig out my tax returns because I hadn't received my refund yet. And I was like, oh, I should have just taken a picture of this and shown this to people, you know, the relationship status.
Been a good social media response.
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, but it's a challenge. It's a challenge in every city, and council is taking it very seriously.
So I believe you recused yourself from the short-term vacancy rental discussions in council, and that was just mainly around perception.
Absolutely. So yeah, provincial legislation requires us to recuse ourselves from discussions for two different reasons. One is if we have a pecuniary or financial interest, which I don't. The other is if there's a perception of bias. And that's the one that's really tricky and really, really important to honor. And so the fact that I rent in a place that happens to use the Airbnb site was just a red flag for me. It's not ethical for me to participate in those discussions because of a perception of bias, and so I have recused myself, as have Councillor Madoff and Councillor Lucas. So there are 6 councillors that are working on this.
Well, that's good to know as well. We have to take a short break, but we'll be right back. Welcome back, Mayor Helps.
Thank you.
Let's start off on a positive note. I wanted to ask you what you feel is the biggest impact you've had personally, either in your role in the CRD or as mayor.
I'll start with mayor first, and I'll go to CRD second. One of the reasons I ran for mayor is because I feel like Victoria had such a sense of potential, such a sense of possibility, but it wasn't being unleashed. And I feel like that's part of what I've been able to help accomplish in the last 2.5 years, to help Victoria unleash its potential, whether it's in arts and culture, in business, in neighborhoods, in engagement, and to have a greater sense of what's possible. I feel like we've had a very narrow horizon for many years, and I feel like, and you can look around the city and feel it, I feel like, oh, yeah, things are possible here. We are, you know, something to be proud of. We do have a story that's different from just our history. And I think that's, you know, it's kind of an intangible accomplishment. But I think, you know, if in these last 2.5 years, people feel like there's a greater sense of the possible and that potential is being unleashed, I think that's part of what I've contributed.
I feel like you've done your job.
Yeah, I feel like I've done my job. And now the next step is, and we'll talk about that later, I guess, imagining what the future looks like. At the CRD, I would say my biggest accomplishment, if you want to call it that, is getting that sewage project moved ahead. I put up my hand and said, give me the chair of the most complicated, cantankerous committee, and you know, with all of my colleagues at the table, and it really was a group effort. We got there, but I do think, you know, I described it once as building a coalition of joy, and I feel like bringing joy to that process and bringing a fresh spirit to that process actually helped us get to shovels in the ground, which is where we are now, and that's something that's been 30 years in the making.
Well, congratulations for that, because it really was a long process and it took a long time. So I think that is something to be proud of.
Yeah, thank you.
So you've spoke often about building a livable city, and I wanted to ask what does that mean to you? What is a livable city in your view?
To me, that's very easy. It's about quality of life. So whether people are in their businesses, in their neighborhoods, in their seniors' home, in their daycare, and everyone knows what quality of life feels like. It means that you can afford to live here. It means you've got good food. It means you know your neighbors. It means that if you're in crisis, there's going to be someone to help you. It's all of those things that make us happy, healthy humans. And I think it's really important for cities, particularly as more people move into them, particularly as there's an increase in density. I don't think we need to trade off those kinds of things with quality of life. In fact, the way we build cities for the 21st century should increase, not deplete quality of life. And so building a livable city is building a city where quality of life is high and where people can live well.
What's one of the more important initiatives under the building a livable city that we haven't talked about?
I would say one of the interesting ones is food systems. I did an interview with some CBC reporter from Montreal yesterday. He was on United Airlines flight and he read about the fact that Victoria has North America's first food eco-district. And he got on a plane and came to Victoria to explore the story. And one of the first things we did as a council is a year-long project called Growing in the City, and changed policies and made it easier for people to grow food in the city, whether it's on rooftops or on boulevards. I think we have the first urban farm stands in the city, so anyone can grow vegetables in their backyard, sell them at the end of their driveway. So it's those, and again, it's not just about food, it's about growing community, creating those connections. But really building a livable city, and I know we're probably going to go over time, but it's a big question. It's about how do we move, transportation, mobility, food, housing. It's the big picture stuff, and that's the stuff I really love. There's not one thing you can do to build a livable city. It's all of those pieces fitted together.
Yeah. Well, I don't think too many people could argue with growing food being, that's really not too contentious, I hope.
No, that one wasn't actually.
Well, we have to take a quick break, but we'll be right back. Welcome back. I wanted to touch on a subject that we've sort of touched on, but haven't really delved into, and that's engagement. So it makes sense to talk about the Crystal Pool because there's been lots of public engagement there. So I wanted to ask you why engagement is so important to you on this project and overall.
We'll start with this project and then go to overall. Crystal Pool is the community's pool. It belongs to the community, it's used by the community, and so as we're building a new facility that's going to be here for the next 50 or 60 years or more, we want to make sure that it meets the community's needs. So the public's been very involved, quite literally, the architect is doing the drawings, but in designing the facility, and that's important because it's the public that's going to use the facility. Engagement's really important overall, because we're only 9 people at the table. We need input, and we need input on big projects, we need input on small projects, and again, the reason we do engagement is so at the end of the day we're not going to make everyone happy, and we're not going to be able to take every good idea, but we really want people to feel that they've had an opportunity to contribute to the direction the city's going.
I think that's one of the most important pieces of your job, really.
Yeah, it is. So someone said, why are you on Facebook at 10:30 a.m. responding to the public? And I'm like, because someone asked a question and that's my job.
Well, then that's a really interesting point, because really that's not something that political leaders or politicians are doing. It's not usually, if someone is responding, it's often not them. And, and that's something that you are actually doing yourself.
Absolutely, without question.
Yeah, so. Speaking of politics, have you given any thought to your political future, and any biggest lessons learned during your whole experience as mayor so far?
Political future in terms of other levels of government, not interested, because I'd have to pick a political party and I wouldn't know which one to pick. In terms of will I run again in 2018, we'll see. It's very likely. When I ran for mayor in 2014, I announced on January 1st, 2014 that that's what I was doing. So the public can expect a very clear announcement one way or the other January 1st, 2018, which is the beginning of an election year.
You're going to keep us in suspense
Keep you in suspense until then. For now, there's lots to do, lots of work to be done. And what I can say is we've built a great team at the city, and we've developed lots of plans in this term, many of which will need to be overseen into implementation. So we'll see. It's like I say, it's likely that I'll run again, but to say for sure right now, it's way too early. It's not an election year, and it's beside the point.
You'll be focused on getting things done. And,
focused on getting things done. Well, right up until the election day, I'm going to be focused on getting things done. I think that is our responsibility. We don't get to take time off to campaign. The best campaigning we can do is to do what we said we're going to do.
Yeah, I think that's very fair. Well, thank you very much for tuning in, and we hope to see you next time on Upfront.